The morning shift at Nebula Station's grand dining hall began like any other for Marcus Chen. He adjusted his server's uniform, checked his appearance in the mirror one last time, and stepped onto the main floor of the most prestigious restaurant in the galaxy's busiest trading hub. The establishment catered to beings from across the known universe, and Marcus had learned to navigate the complex web of alien customs, dietary requirements, and social hierarchies that came with serving such a diverse clientele. Marcus had been working at the Grand Dining Hall for 3 years now, ever since humanity had been granted membership in the Galactic Trade Federation. Humans were still considered newcomers, barely tolerated in most circles, viewed as primitive and unpredictable by the older, more established species. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough to support his family back on Earth, and Marcus took pride in his work. The lunch rush was in full swing when she shuffled in. Marcus noticed her immediately because she moved so slowly, each step deliberate and careful. She was a Zephyrian, one of the ancient races that had helped found the Trade Federation over 2 millennia ago. Her crystalline skin had the clouded appearance that came with extreme age, and her once bright blue luminescence had faded to barely visible flickers. She wore simple robes that had seen better days, and she clutched a worn walking stick that seemed older than some civilizations. Marcus watched as she approached the host station, where Kelvac, a pompous Zentaurian with an inflated sense of his own importance, stood reviewing reservation lists. The elderly Zephyrian spoke softly, her voice barely audible above the dining room's ambient noise. Kelvac's expression quickly shifted from professional courtesy to obvious disdain. "I'm sorry, but we have a strict dress code," Kelvac announced loudly, his voice carrying across the nearby tables. Several diners turned to look, including a group of wealthy Altarian merchants who began whispering among themselves. This establishment maintains certain standards. The old Zephyrian's luminescence flickered more dimly, a clear sign of embarrassment among her species. She reached into her robes and produced a small, tarnished credit chip, offering it with trembling hands. "I have payment," she said quietly. "I just wanted one meal. It's been so long since I could afford—" "Ma'am, please," Kelvac interrupted, his tone growing more dismissive. "Even if you could pay, which I doubt that ancient ship has any viable credits, look at yourself. Look at this place. You don't belong here." Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd seen this kind of treatment before, usually directed at humans, but it never failed to anger him. The Grand Dining Hall prided itself on serving anyone who could pay, regardless of species or background. The only thing that seemed to matter to management was the size of your credit account and your social status. The elderly Zephyrian stood there for a moment longer, her faded luminescence pulsing irregularly. Marcus could see tears forming in her large, ancient eyes. She began to turn away, accepting the humiliation with a dignity that somehow made the situation even worse. That's when Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He stepped forward, intercepting the old woman before she could reach the door. "Excuse me," he said gently, offering her his arm for support. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Your table is right this way." Kelvac's eyes widened in disbelief. "Chen, what do you think you're doing? I explicitly told her—" "You told her about the dress code," Marcus interrupted, guiding the Zephyrian toward a quiet corner table. "But you didn't scan her credit chip. How do you know she can't pay?" Before Kelvac could respond, Marcus had seated the elderly alien at one of the smaller tables, away from the judgmental stares of the other patrons. He knelt beside her chair, speaking softly. "What can I get for you today? Our chef makes an excellent Andromedan soup that's very gentle on the digestive system." The old Zephyrian looked up at him with wonder, her faded luminescence brightening slightly. You're human, aren't you? I thought your species was supposed to be as prejudiced as the rest of them." Marcus smiled. We have our moments. But my grandmother always taught me that kindness doesn't cost anything, and everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Now, about that meal. For the next hour, Marcus attended to the elderly Zephyrian with the same care and attention he would have given to a visiting dignitary. He learned that her name was Veriloth, that she had once been a respected scientist in the early days of the Trade Federation, and that she had fallen on hard times after a series of bad investments and the death of her family members. She had been living in the station's lower levels, barely scraping by on a minimal pension. Marcus brought her the soup, along with fresh bread and a selection of fruits that he knew were safe for her species. He even managed to convince the chef to prepare a small portion of Zephyrian honey cakes, a delicacy that Veriloth hadn't tasted in years. When she tried to pay with her tarnished credit chip, Marcus discreetly ran it through an updated scanner and discovered it held far more credits than its appearance suggested. Zephyrian technology was famously durable and deceptive. This chip has over 50,000 credits, he told her quietly. More than enough for meals here for months. Veriloth's luminescence brightened considerably. I had forgotten. My late husband loaded it before he passed, said it was for emergencies. I suppose being hungry counts as an emergency. As Marcus served her, he noticed other things. Her robes, while worn, were made of genuine Zephyrian silk, worth a fortune to collectors. Her walking stick bore intricate carvings that suggested it was more than just a mobility aid. Most importantly, he noticed the way other Zephyrians in the restaurant began to take notice, their luminescence flickering in patterns he'd learned to recognize as signs of respect and recognition. The meal proceeded beautifully until Mr. Gavarian arrived. Torkel Gavarian was the Grand Dining Hall's general manager, a Centaurian known for his ruthless business practices and complete lack of empathy. He had built his career on catering to the wealthy and influential while treating anyone he deemed beneath him with open contempt. He particularly disliked humans, viewing them as an inferior species that had somehow stumbled into galactic society. Gavarian spotted Marcus serving Veriloth and immediately strode over, his face darkening with anger. Chen, what is the meaning of this? Kelvac told me he specifically refused service to this person, and yet here you are, directly contradicting his decision. Marcus straightened, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the growing attention from other diners. Sir, I verified that the customer has sufficient funds and is causing no disturbance. I saw no reason to refuse service. No reason? Gavarian's voice rose, causing conversations at nearby tables to halt. Look at her. She's practically in rags. Do you have any idea what kind of clientele we serve here? What they expect when they dine at the Grand Dining Hall? Veriloth started to stand, clearly intending to leave to avoid causing further trouble. But Marcus gently placed a hand on her shoulder. With respect, sir, she's a paying customer who's been nothing but polite and courteous. She's not bothering anyone. She's bothering me, Gavarian snapped. And more importantly, she's bothering our real customers. I will not have this establishment's reputation damaged by your misguided human sentimentality. The dining room had gone almost completely quiet now. Marcus was acutely aware that dozens of beings from across the galaxy were watching this confrontation unfold. Among them, he noticed, were several other elderly patrons who seemed to be paying particularly close attention. She's a Zephyrian elder, Marcus said firmly. Her species helped found the Trade Federation. She deserves our respect. Gavarian laughed coldly. An elder? Look at her. She's obviously some vagrant who scraped together enough credits for one meal. Probably stole them. Zephyrian elders don't dress like beggars and eat alone in public establishments. That comment caused Veriloth's luminescence to flicker with what Marcus recognized as deep pain. He felt his anger building, but he forced himself to remain calm. Sir, I've verified her payment method. She's causing no problems. I don't see why— Because I said so, Gavarian roared. You're a server, Chen, a human server. Your job is to do what you're told, not to make policy decisions about who we serve. Now escort this vagrant out of my restaurant immediately, or you're fired. Marcus looked down at Veriloth, who was trying to make herself smaller in her chair, clearly mortified by the scene. Then he looked around the dining room at all the watching faces. He thought about his family back on Earth, about the job he needed, about the careful position humans held in galactic society. Then he thought about his grandmother's words about kindness and dignity. No, he said quietly. Excuse me? Gavarian's voice was dangerously low. I said no, sir. I won't escort a paying customer out just because you don't like how she looks. It's wrong. The silence in the dining room was deafening. Gavarian's face cycled through several colors, settling on a deep purple that indicated extreme rage among Centaurians. Fine. You're fired, Chen. Security will escort you off the station within the hour. And you, he turned to Veriloth, are no longer welcome in any establishment I manage. Leave now, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Marcus began untying his apron, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what had just happened. He'd lost his job, probably his work visa, and definitely his future in the Trade Federation. But as he looked at Veriloth, who was quietly gathering her things with wounded dignity, he felt no regret. Ma'am, he said gently, offering her his arm again, allow me to walk you out. As they moved toward the door, Marcus became aware of movement throughout the dining room. Several of the elderly patrons had stood up, including the Zephyrians whose luminescence had been flickering in recognition patterns. One of them, an ancient being whose crystalline skin showed the deep blue of extreme age and wisdom, stepped forward. Veriloth, the elder said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. Veriloth Kinaraseth? Is that truly you? Veriloth stopped, her luminescence suddenly blazing brighter than Marcus had seen it all day. Thaindor? Thaindor Melchiorvan? But what are you doing here? I might ask you the same question, old friend. The elder moved forward with surprising speed for one so obviously ancient. It has been— how long? 50 cycles since the Andromedan Conference? As the two elderly Zephyrians embraced, their combined luminescence filling the corner of the restaurant with beautiful, shifting patterns of light, Marcus began to understand that something significant was happening. Other elderly patrons were moving closer, and he caught fragments of whispered conversations in various languages, many expressing shock and recognition. But before he could process what this meant, Gavarian's security team arrived to escort him from the building. As Marcus was led away, he caught one last glimpse of Veriloth surrounded by a growing group of beings who seemed to know and respect her, their faces showing the kind of reverence usually reserved for legendary figures. The last thing he heard before the dining room doors closed behind him was Thaindor's voice, raised in surprise and what sounded like awe. You mean to tell me that the human server who defended you is the same one who just lost his position? Do you understand who you are, child? Do any of you understand who this remarkable woman truly is? Marcus was escorted to his quarters to pack his belongings, his mind racing with questions about what he had just witnessed. But those questions would have to wait. In less than an hour, he would be on a transport off Nebula Station, his career in galactic hospitality over before it had really begun. He had no way of knowing that in the grand dining hall behind him, Veriloth was about to reveal her true identity to a dining room full of some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and that his simple act of kindness was about to trigger a chain of events that would reshape humanity's place in the universe forever. Marcus sat on the edge of his narrow bunk in the station's temporary housing, staring at his packed belongings. Everything he owned fit into 2 standard cargo containers, a stark reminder of how far he was from home, and how precarious his position had always been. The transport to Earth wouldn't depart for another 6 hours, giving him too much time to think about what he'd just thrown away. His communication device chimed with a message from his sister Sarah, back on Earth. She was asking about his latest paycheck, needed help with their mother's medical bills. Marcus stared at the message for a long time before typing back a simple response. There might be a delay. I'll explain later. He couldn't bring himself to tell her that he'd lost his job, lost everything they'd worked for. The guilt sat heavy in his stomach, but even now, he couldn't regret what he'd done. The image of Veriloth's dignified suffering was burned into his memory, along with the cruel laughter in Gavarian's voice. Meanwhile, in the grand dining hall, something unprecedented was happening. After Marcus had been escorted away, the elderly Zephyrian named Thaindor had helped Veriloth to her feet, his luminescence pulsing with patterns that other Zephyrians immediately recognized as deep respect and amazement. The dining room remained unusually quiet, with patrons from across the galaxy straining to understand what was unfolding. "My dear friend," Thaindor said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "when you disappeared after the Sigma Draconis incident, we all feared the worst. The entire scientific community mourned your loss. And now I find you here, being treated like—" He turned toward Gavarian with fury building in his ancient eyes. Gavarian, still flushed with anger from his confrontation with Marcus, stepped forward impatiently. "I don't care what sob story you're spinning, but this vagrant needs to leave my establishment immediately. You're welcome to continue your reunion elsewhere." Thaindor's luminescence suddenly shifted to a brilliant gold pattern that made several nearby Zephyrians gasp and immediately bow their heads. "Vagrant?" he repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You dare call Dr. Veriloth Kanaraseth, the architect of modern galactic medicine, the woman who developed the universal tissue regeneration protocols that have saved billions of lives across the galaxy, a vagrant?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even Gavarian seemed to sense that something had shifted dramatically, though his arrogance prevented him from backing down. "I don't care what title she used to hold. Look at her now. Rules are rules." But the damage was done. Word was already spreading through the dining room like wildfire. Veriloth Kanaraseth. The name passed from table to table in whispered awe. She was a legend, a figure from the early days of galactic cooperation, whose discoveries had revolutionized medicine for every known species. She had been presumed dead for over 30 years. An elderly Altarian merchant rose from his table, his usually stern features soft with reverence. "Dr. Kanaraseth saved my daughter's life 40 years ago. Her regeneration protocols restored limbs that our own medicine couldn't heal." He turned to Gavarian with contempt. "And you would throw her out like garbage?" Similar stories began emerging from around the room. A Centaurian diplomat spoke of how Veriloth's research had ended a plague that threatened his homeworld. A group of Andromedan traders recounted how her innovations in cross-species medical compatibility had made interstellar commerce possible by ensuring that beings from different worlds could safely interact. Veriloth stood in the center of this growing recognition, her luminescence fluctuating with embarrassment and old pain. "Please," she said quietly, "that was all so long ago. I'm not that person anymore." "You are exactly that person," Thaindor insisted. "You vanished after your research station was destroyed in the Sigma Draconis solar flare, after you lost your team. We searched for survivors for years. When we couldn't find you, we assumed—" "I couldn't face anyone," Veriloth admitted, her voice barely audible. "My research, my team, everything I'd built. Gone in an instant. The guilt? I blame myself for not evacuating sooner, for trusting that the solar weather predictions were accurate." Thaindor's luminescence softened to gentle blues and purples, colors of compassion and understanding among their species. "So you've been hiding here all these years? Living in poverty when you could have had anything you wanted? When the galaxy owes you so much?" Before Veraloth could answer, a commotion arose near the entrance. A group of beings in formal Trade Federation uniforms had arrived, led by an imposing figure that made even the wealthy diners take notice. Ambassador Keith Tull of the High Council strode into the dining room, his ceremonial robes marking him as one of the most powerful beings in known space. Gavarian immediately rushed forward, his earlier anger replaced by obsequious eagerness to please such an important visitor. "Ambassador Keith Tull, what an unexpected honor! I'll have my best table prepared immediately." The ambassador ignored him completely, his attention focused entirely on the group gathered around Veraloth. "Is it true?" he asked Thaindor in a voice that commanded absolute attention. "Is she really here? Alive?" "It's true, old friend. Dr. Veraloth Kinaraseth lives." Ambassador Keith Tull approached Veraloth with steps that seemed almost reverent. When he reached her, he did something that stunned everyone present. He knelt. The highest-ranking Trade Federation official on Nebula Station knelt before the woman who had been minutes away from being thrown out as a vagrant. "Dr. Kinaraseth," he said formally, "the galaxy has mourned your loss for 3 decades. Your contributions to interspecies medicine, to our very ability to coexist and thrive together, cannot be measured. If you had not disappeared, you would have received the Galactic Medal of Honor, the highest recognition our civilization can bestow." Veraloth's luminescence flickered with overwhelming emotion. "I don't deserve such recognition. Not after I failed so completely." "Failed?" Ambassador Keith Tull rose, his expression incredulous. "Dr. Kinaraseth, your research has been the foundation for every major medical advance for the past 30 years. The regeneration centers on every world-use protocols you developed. The universal blood substitute that allows emergency treatment regardless of species. Your work. The neural compatibility matrices that let us share thoughts and emotions across biological barriers, based on your research." As the ambassador spoke, more recognition spread through the dining room. Several patrons were now openly weeping, overwhelmed by finding themselves in the presence of someone they had revered as a hero for decades. Others were frantically making communication calls, spreading word of the discovery. But one person in the room was growing increasingly agitated. Gavarian had listened to this revelation with mounting horror, realizing the magnitude of his mistake. He had not only insulted one of the galaxy's greatest heroes, but he had done so in front of dozens of witnesses, including Trade Federation officials. "There's been a misunderstanding," he began desperately. "If I had known who she was—" "But you didn't know," Ambassador Keith Tull interrupted coldly. "And that is precisely the point. You judged a being solely on their appearance, assumed the worst, and treated them with cruelty. Even worse, you fired the one person who recognized her inherent dignity and treated her with kindness." The ambassador turned to address the room at large. "Where is this human server I've been told about? The one who defended Dr. Kinaraseth?" "Marcus Chen," Veraloth said quietly, her first words since the ambassador's arrival. "His name is Marcus Chen, and yes, he defended me when no one else would. He lost his position because he refused to let me be mistreated." Ambassador Keith Tull's expression grew even more severe. "A human showed more wisdom and compassion than the management of this establishment? This is deeply troubling." Gavarian was sweating now, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Sir, if you'll allow me to explain the circumstances—" "The circumstances are clear," the ambassador replied. "You treated a galactic treasure like refuse, and you punished the one being who recognized her worth. The question now is what we do about it." At that moment, another figure entered the dining room. Captain Yalamoth of Station Security, a no-nonsense Balarian who had served in her position for over a decade. She approached the group with the careful steps of someone who sensed she was walking into a situation far more complex than initially reported. "Ambassador," she said formally, "I received reports of a disturbance requiring security intervention. My teams were told to escort a terminated human employee off the station." "Captain," Ambassador Keith Tall replied, "I'm countermanding those orders. Mr. Marcus Chen is not to leave this station. In fact, I want him brought here immediately with full honors." Captain Yalamoth looked confused, but nodded. "Of course, sir. May I ask why?" Thaindor stepped forward. "Captain, that human showed more character and dignity in one act than most beings display in a lifetime. While others saw only an elderly person in worn clothing, he saw someone deserving of respect and kindness. His actions today revealed the presence of one of the galaxy's greatest heroes." As Captain Yalamoth hurried away to find Marcus, the atmosphere in the dining room continued to evolve. What had begun as a routine lunch service had become something approaching a historic moment. Patrons were no longer eating. They were witnessing the return of a legend and the recognition of an unlikely hero. Viraloth, overwhelmed by the attention and emotion, sank back into her chair. "This is too much," she whispered. "I've been hidden for so long. I don't know how to be that person anymore." "You never stopped being that person," Thaindor said gently. "You just forgot for a while. But your presence here, the way you've maintained your dignity despite hardship, proves that the woman who changed the galaxy still exists." Ambassador Keith Tall was conferring quietly with his aides, making arrangements that would clearly have far-reaching consequences. Meanwhile, Gavarian stood frozen, realizing that his career was likely over, destroyed by his own prejudice and cruelty. But the most important person in this unfolding drama was still unaware of what was happening. Marcus Chen sat in his quarters, trying to compose a letter to his family explaining why he would be returning to Earth in disgrace, having no idea that his simple act of kindness had just changed everything. The transport to Earth seemed less important now. In fact, Ambassador Keith Tall was already making calls to ensure that transport would be significantly delayed. There were much more important matters to attend to first, beginning with making sure that the human who had recognized true worth when others saw only appearances received the recognition he deserved. As Captain Yalamoth returned with Marcus Chen in tow, the grand dining hall prepared for a reunion that would reshape not only the lives of those involved, but potentially the relationship between humanity and the rest of the galactic community. Sometimes, the ambassador reflected, the greatest changes came from the smallest acts of courage and kindness. Marcus followed Captain Yalamoth through the station corridors with growing confusion. He'd expected to be escorted to the departure terminal, not back toward the grand dining hall. When the captain had arrived at his quarters, she'd been unusually respectful, even apologetic, mentioning something about important developments and ambassador's direct orders. "Captain?" Marcus finally asked as they approached the restaurant. "What's happening? I thought I was being deported." Captain Yalamoth paused outside the dining hall entrance, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Chen, I've been doing this job for 12 years. I've seen a lot of things, handled a lot of situations. But what's waiting for you in there? I've never seen anything like it." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the doors opened, and he stepped into a scene that defied comprehension. The grand dining hall had been transformed. What had been a typical lunch service when he left was now something approaching a formal gathering. Nearly every patron remained, but they were all standing, facing toward the corner table where he'd served Viraloth. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Keith Tall, whose presence alone would have been enough to stop traffic on most worlds. But surrounding him were faces Marcus recognized, elderly beings from various species, all wearing expressions of profound respect and emotion. And there, still seated at the small corner table, was Viraloth, though she seemed somehow different now. Her luminescence was brighter, more confident, and she was no longer alone. The moment Marcus entered, a hush fell over the room. Ambassador Keith Tal stepped forward, his formal robes rustling with each step. "Mr. Marcus Chen," he said in a voice that carried to every corner of the dining hall, "you have been brought here to receive the gratitude of the Galactic Trade Federation." Marcus looked around the room in bewilderment. "Sir, I think there's been some mistake. I was fired for violating company policy. I don't understand." "The mistake," Ambassador Keith Tal interrupted, "was not yours. Mr. Chen, do you know who you served lunch to today?" Marcus glanced toward Veriloth, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Her name is Veriloth. She's a Zephyrian elder who was being treated poorly because of her appearance. Her full name," Ambassador Keith Tal continued, "is Dr. Veriloth Kinara. She is the architect of modern galactic medicine, the developer of universal tissue regeneration protocols, and the author of the medical compatibility standards that make interspecies cooperation possible. She has been missing and presumed dead for 30 years. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at Veriloth, seeing her differently now. The walking stick he'd noticed was carved with medical symbols. The robes, while worn, bore the subtle patterns that indicated advanced academic achievement among Zephyrians. The deference that other Zephyrians in the restaurant had shown suddenly made sense. "I had no idea," Marcus whispered. "That is precisely why your actions were so remarkable," said Thaindor, stepping forward. "You saw an elderly being in need and offered kindness without expectation of reward or recognition. You defended her dignity when others saw only perceived status. You risked your livelihood for a stranger." Ambassador Keith Tal nodded gravely. "Mr. Chen, what you did today exemplifies the highest ideals of the Trade Federation. You treated all beings with equal dignity, refused to judge by appearance, and stood firm in your principles even when threatened with consequences." Marcus felt overwhelmed, his mind racing to process this revelation. "But I still don't understand why I'm here. Shouldn't Dr. Kinara be the focus of attention?" Veriloth rose from her chair, moving with more grace and confidence than she had shown earlier. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority that had once commanded respect across the galaxy. "Marcus Chen, may I tell you what your kindness meant to me today?" She approached him slowly. Her luminescence pulsing in patterns that Marcus had learned indicated deep emotion among Zephyrians. "For 30 years, I have hidden from the galaxy that once knew me. I blamed myself for the loss of my research team, for failing to predict the solar flare that destroyed everything I had built. I lived in shadows, convinced that I was a failure who deserved obscurity." Her luminescence brightened as she continued. "Today, I gathered the courage to spend some of my remaining credits on one good meal, one small taste of the life I used to know. Instead, I was reminded of how the galaxy sees the elderly, the worn, the apparently worthless. I was about to retreat back into hiding, to accept that this was what I deserved." She reached out and took Marcus's hand, her crystalline skin warm to the touch. "Then a young human server, someone who barely knows me, someone who gains nothing from defending me, chose to treat me with dignity. You saw worth where others saw worthlessness. You gave me back my sense of self-respect." Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes. "Dr. Kinara, I'm sorry you had to go through that. No one deserves to be treated the way Gavarian treated you." "And that," Ambassador Keith Tal interjected, "brings us to the matter of consequences." The ambassador turned toward where Gavarian stood near the kitchen entrance, his face pale with the understanding that his world was about to collapse. "Mr. Gavarian, step forward." Gavarian approached reluctantly, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "Ambassador, if I could explain—" "You can explain to the Trade Federation Ethics Committee." Ambassador Keith Tal cut him off. Your actions today constitute discrimination based on appearance and economic status, verbal assault of a Federation hero, and the wrongful termination of an employee who upheld our highest values. You are hereby banned from managing any establishment that serves Trade Federation members, and this restaurant's operating license is suspended pending a full investigation. Gasps echoed around the dining room. The Grand Dining Hall was one of the most successful restaurants in the galaxy. Its closure would send shockwaves through Nebula Station's business community. But Ambassador Keith Tal wasn't finished. Furthermore, Mr. Chen, the Trade Federation owes you a debt of gratitude. Not only did you treat Dr. Kinarazeth with the respect she deserved, but your actions led to her rediscovery by the galactic community. The benefits that will flow from her return to active research and consultation cannot be calculated. Marcus shook his head, still struggling to process everything. Sir, I was just doing what felt right. Anyone would have— No, Veriloth interrupted gently. Not anyone would have. In my years of hiding, I've encountered countless beings who looked right through me, who saw only an aging vagrant. You were the first to see a person worthy of dignity. Thaindor stepped forward again. Mr. Chen, the Zephyrian Scientific Council would like to offer you a position as liaison between Dr. Kinarazeth and the broader galactic community. Your ability to recognize worth beyond appearances, combined with your obvious compassion, makes you uniquely qualified to help her navigate her return to prominence. The pay, Ambassador Keith Tal added with what might have been a smile, would be considerably better than restaurant service, and it comes with full Trade Federation diplomatic status. Marcus felt dizzy. Hours ago, he'd been facing deportation and disgrace. Now he was being offered a position that would not only solve his family's financial problems, but potentially elevate humanity's status in galactic society. I don't know what to say, he stammered. Say yes, Veriloth suggested, her luminescence brightening with what Marcus now recognized as amusement. I could use a friend who sees me as a person rather than a legend, and besides, I believe your grandmother would approve. Marcus started. How did you know about my grandmother? You mentioned her when you served me lunch. You said she taught you that kindness doesn't cost anything. I think I would have liked her very much. Around them, the dining hall erupted in applause. Beings from across the galaxy, many of whom had never interacted with humans before, were celebrating the actions of a young man who had simply chosen to do the right thing. As the celebration continued, Captain Yalamoth approached Ambassador Keith Tal. Sir, what should we do about the transport to Earth? It's scheduled to depart in 3 hours. Cancel Mr. Chen's passage, the ambassador replied. He won't be needing it. In fact, I suspect his family will be joining him here quite soon. The Federation takes care of its heroes. Over the following days, news of the incident spread throughout the galaxy. The story of a human server who had recognized and defended a legendary scientist sparked discussions about dignity, respect, and the tendency to judge others by appearance. More importantly for Marcus, it established humanity as a species capable of wisdom and compassion beyond their years in galactic society. The Grand Dining Hall was eventually reopened under new management, with Marcus Chen as part owner and Veriloth as a special consultant. The corner table where their friendship began was marked with a small plaque that read, "Dignity has no dress code." Dr. Veriloth Kinarazeth returned to active research, her new work focusing on the psychological aspects of healing and the importance of compassion in medical care. Her findings, influenced partly by her experience of being seen versus being overlooked, revolutionized treatment approaches across the galaxy once again. Marcus's family joined him on Nebula Station within a month, his mother's medical bills now easily manageable with his new position's benefits. His sister Sarah often joked that only Marcus could get fired for being too kind and end up better off than he'd ever dreamed. But perhaps the most significant change was subtler. The incident became a catalyst for broader discussions about how the galaxy's various species treated their elderly, their poor, and their displaced. The Kanaraseth protocols were established, ensuring that all beings, regardless of appearance or apparent status, would receive basic dignity and respect in Trade Federation establishments. As Marcus settled into his new life, working alongside one of the galaxy's greatest minds while helping to bridge understanding between species, he often thought about that moment when he chose to defend a stranger. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, just the right thing to do. He never could have imagined that one act of simple human kindness would reshape not only his own destiny, but potentially the future of interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. In the end, that's what made it truly worthy of the designation humanity, Phi. Yeah, not because humans were superior, but because in that moment one human had chosen to exemplify the best of what any species could be.